Saddam Hussein was known as the Butcher of Baghdad, but you could say he was more of a shepherd who led himself to the slaughterhouse. Like many dictators, his rule is marked with the tropes of any tyrant: oppression, aggression, and violence. Yet, he stands apart from the likes of Hitler or Stalin for doing what they couldn't do, or wouldn't do. Saddam means the one who confronts. So it's a fitting name for a man whose time at the top was marked with backstabbing, wars, and invasion.
On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war.
Thankfully, his reign of terror finally ended when he was forced into exile and found hiding in a tiny dugout on a secluded farm. But was his end out of the blue? Or had there been signs that it was a long time coming? Whatever you think you know, we promise there's more to Saddam's story than meets the eye. So it's time to learn how history works as we uncover Saddam Hussein's rise to power and fall to madness. Saddam Hussein caused problems before he was born, on the 28th of April 1937. His brother and father had died of cancer in the months leading up to his arrival, and his broken-hearted mother believed the unborn child had cursed her. She claimed Satan was in her belly and tried to abort the baby, and even tried to take her own life. Things didn't get better once he was born. His mother abandoned him, and he was forced to be taken in by an uncle. He would return home when his mother remarried, but according to a CIA profile, Saddam would be regularly beaten by his stepfather. Apparently, the vicious beatings were used to wake him up. This early childhood trauma might explain how Saddam eventually became a full-fledged masochist. By the time Saddam was 10 years old, he had had enough, so he fled to Baghdad. Unlike his village near Tikrit, the city had roads and electricity. Most importantly, Saddam now had a father figure, his uncle. His uncle was a devout Sunni and a veteran of the 1941 Anglo-Iraqi War, which meant Saddam's blossoming interest in violence would soon receive a political greenhouse to grow in. Iraq had been changing a lot since the Ottoman Empire fell at the end of World War I. The British thanked the Hashemite family for joining the Arab revolt against the Ottomans, and so installed them as a monarchy in the newly crowned Kingdom of Iraq on the 23rd of August 1921. But there was criticism of it being a puppet monarchy. So, in 1941, the anti-British and pro-Axis politician Rashid Ghalani worked with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy to overthrow the king. A month later, a British-led military alliance forced Ghalani from his throne and reinstated the Hashemite family. This means Saddam's formative years were ones of coups and political uncertainty. But Saddam's uncle was a devoted teacher. Not only did he send Saddam to a nationalistic high school, but he also wrote political pamphlets at home. One had the catchy title of "Thee whom God should not have created, Persians, Jews and flies." It might not have had the catchiest title, but Saddam would make sure that under his reign, plenty of children would be forced to read it. Whether at school, at home or in the village, Saddam was exposed to a hotbed of political and religious ideology. It is perhaps not surprising that he would take an interest in politics. Though he did study law for 3 years after high school, the 20-year-old would drop out of his course to join the revolutionary Pan-Arab Ba'ath Party. It was the same party his uncle was part of, which meant Saddam was now wholly dedicated to learning its ideology, which included a desire to become a one-party state. This was a time of revolution. Egypt's Nasser was galvanizing grassroots movements for Arab nationalism. At the time, there were only 300 members in the Ba'ath Party, but soon, numbers would grow, and Saddam's familial connections would bring him to the top. The start of his rise to power happened just 1 year later, with a coup d'etat that removed the royal family once and for all. The July 14th revolution took place in 1958 and was led by Abd al-Karim Qasim. He ushered in the Iraqi Republic, but would not remain in power long. In his cabinet were Ba'ath Party members, who were growing angry that the guy they helped get in power was backtracking on his pan-Arab policies. They started to plot against him, and in one assassination attempt they turned to a young and passionate soldier to help. His name was Saddam Hussein. Saddam was part of a hit squad that tried to ambush Qasim's car, but they foolishly flanked the vehicle from both sides and shot each other. The president escaped, but Saddam took a bullet. The mission was such an embarrassing failure that when Saddam and his co-assassins ran to the getaway car, they found out that their driver was in a cafe playing backgammon. This marked the end to the beginning of Saddam's political career. With no political prospects and the Iraqi forces after him, Saddam fled to Egypt, where he continued his law degree. But he would only live in Cairo until 1963, when yet another Iraqi coup went down. The Ramadan Revolution of 1963 executed Qasim. It was pulled off by the Iraqi wing of the Ba'ath Party, but that would only last 9 months before another coup happened, this time by the pro-Nasser side from within the Ba'ath Party. Though no blood was spilt during the overthrow, a purge soon followed of party members. Next came the coup of 1968, which meant Iraq was seeing more revolutions than a hamster wheel. Up until now, Saddam had returned, but his street thug reputation for violence meant he was demoted to the position of lackey. But the latest coup changed things, because it was led by Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, a distant relative of Saddam. Nepotism was the thing that finally put Saddam on the fast track for dictatorship. Al-Bakr took fondly to Saddam. He was passionate, loyal, and his penchant for violence made him perfect as head of security. The last thing al-Bakr needed was another coup, but this meant that Saddam was now learning on the job the ins and outs of how to overthrow a government. This would help him grasp power, and would also help him to keep opponents at bay. Saddam excelled at violence. Though pulling nails and teeth was seen as undignified by al-Bakr, Saddam was a gifted and creative torturer. Unlike other dictators, Saddam personally performed violence on prisoners. He had such a love for it that he perfected 107 different methods of interrogation, including lashing, electrocution, water submersion, and burning the eyes of victims with cigarettes. To help him on the street, Saddam recruited tough, uneducated young men from his own tribe. This was textbook street gang stuff. He showered the village boys with cars and money and homes to win their loyalty, while playing the gentleman with superiors in government. In fact, he was so good at beefing up security that he was promoted to vice president. He was the rising star of the Ba'ath Party and just one chair away from leading it. But Saddam was a patient man. Any talented torturer needs to be, and with the president's trust, his loyal security network, and his invaluable knowledge in the art of the coup, Saddam just needed to bide his time until he became supreme leader. Bit by bit, Saddam started spreading rumors of the president's ill health until July of 1979, when he marched into al-Bakr's office to give him an offer he couldn't refuse: resign for health reasons now, or suffer the consequences. With the metaphorical pointing of a gun and the waving of an ink pen, Saddam was now ruler. But what came next was perhaps the most shocking display that any dictator has ever put on. We don't have video footage of Hitler's Night of the Long Knives or of Stalin's Great Purges, but we do have news footage of the moment politicians realized that Saddam was here to stay. A week after forcing al-Bakr to resign, Saddam calls a meeting. None of the politicians know what the meeting is about, but when they enter the assembly, they see television cameras, and Saddam sitting there, smoking a cigar. Then a man approaches the microphone. This man was the former president's secretary, who foolishly showed skepticism of Saddam's claim to power. So, he had to be made an example of. Believing that his life would be spared, he read out a false confession claiming to be involved with a conspiracy against the party. He claimed that the other co-conspirators were in the room. Whenever a name was read from the list, security forces escorted that man outside. Slowly, but surely, the assembly realized that these men were being taken directly firing squads, and that the list would go on and on and on. In a desperate bid to save their skin, men started to stand up one by one and proclaim loyalty to Saddam. They honored him and swore allegiance. And while Saddam watched his power consolidate, and the fear spread throughout the room and across the country of Iraq, calmly smoked his Cuban cigar. Like any dictator worth their salt, Saddam used nationalizing to secure funds and distribute it to the poor. He nationalized the oil industry and paid for schools, hospitals, and roads. Raising literacy and quality of life may be a good thing, but this Robin Hood tactic is a mind game for tyrants to secure popularity. Years earlier, anti-Semitism was at a high following Israel's victory in the Six-Day War. So, Saddam publicly executed 14 people who were falsely accused to have been intelligence agents.
Of Saddam's regime, his thugs prepared to kill their own people, the parading of prisoners of war, and now the release of those pictures of executed British soldiers.
This proved to people what would happen if they went against Iraq. And now that the man who pulled it off was in charge and giving them cash, you can understand how easy it was to buy their silence. People were terrified of him, and if you didn't rock the boat, the system was a good place to live in, and he made sure people knew it. Portraits of Saddam were erected and mandated by law in schools, cafes, and even homes. But he was also generous. Every year on his birthday, Saddam gifted the Iraqi people a new statue of himself. But then the Iran Revolution happened, which threatened Saddam's regime. The Ayatollah Khomeini was a Shiite Muslim, just like most Iraqi. But Saddam and his government was Sunni, so Islamist revolution in the neighboring state was a threat, especially when Khomeini was telling Shiites to rise up. Saddam had to nip this in the bud, but he also wanted to humiliate his neighbor. After all, his uncle had explained that Persians were the historical enemies of the Arabs. The fact that Iran was 3 times the size and fueled by recent zeal did not discourage Saddam from believing he could win the war in just 3 weeks. 8 years later, the war finally ended. What started with Iraqi forces going over the border with no warning ended with hundreds upon thousands of deaths. Saddam was unable to win even an inch of territory. That was with the support of the West. To the West, the secular Saddam seemed better than Iran's revolution, especially after the hostage crisis at the American embassy in Tehran. It was a classic case of my enemy's enemy is my friend, but no doubt Saddam and the West had a bad taste in their mouth when they agreed to work together. Saddam secretly built a chemical weapons facility to produce a nerve agent that even Hitler refused to use. You know you're a nut job when Adolf Hitler has the moral high ground. And they turned a blind eye again when Saddam used WMDs on Iraqi people. Saddam had problems with the Kurds in northern Iraq. As a distinct ethnicity and culture with their own language, the Kurds wanted an independent state. Saddam wanted them gone. In March of 1988, Saddam dropped nerve agent on Al-Anfal, killing between 50,000 to 100,000 people. The sights of bodies of children and mothers cradling babies lying in the street did little to dismantle Saddam's power.
This is a regime that has something to hide from the civilized world. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
Only 4 nations recognize this as an attempted genocide: Sweden, South Korea, Norway, and the United Kingdom. But Saddam had already shown disregard for Iraqi life during his war with Iran. In a bid to root out rebels hiding in reeds, he drained the marshes, thereby eradicating the ecosystem and way of life for marsh Arabs. Saddam's disregard for the Iraqi people went into overdrive following the ceasefire with Iran. His nation was in ruins from the war, but he splashed money on vanity projects and more statues. His name was on everything: airports, stadiums, museums. It was like a franchise. He was so detached from reality that he even proclaimed himself victor in the Iraq-Iran war. However, the one thing he couldn't ignore was the debt he'd run up. He owed $40 billion to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia for the money he borrowed to fund his lost war. So, what did he do when Kuwait knocked on the door, politely asking for their $15 billion back? He invaded them.
Word that Iraq has invaded neighboring state of Kuwait, with fighting reported along the border. The residents say that they were awakened by machine gun fire and heavy artillery.
The coalition against Saddam's invasion of Kuwait was bigger than the coalition against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Even Egypt and Syria teamed up with the US and Russia to kick Saddam out. By now, anti-Saddam sentiment was reaching boiling point back home. Iraqis, Kurds, Shiites, and marsh Arab tribes rose up. But the coalition stopped short of removing Saddam, so he was able to squash the rebellion in his home country. "The Americans are scared to fight me in Iraq," went his propaganda machine. He declared victory once again and celebrated with even grander displays of vanity. Not even tough UN sanctions on oil sales and imports could persuade him to spend money on food and medicine for the people of Iraq. And why should he? He hated the UN. When weapons inspectors came to see if he had complied with the demand to dissolve his WMD program, they were refused entry into facilities, with some inspectors even admitting that Iraqi officials tried to bribe them into writing clean reports. All this is to say that the world was growing tired of Saddam, especially the Iraqi people. By the time 9/11 happened, it was becoming clear that terrorists were traveling on Iraqi diplomatic passports. The writing was on the wall. Even Gaddafi helped uncover dirt on Saddam by providing evidence that Saddam's regime was buying missiles from North Korea. Iraqi rebels had also warned that weapons had been smuggled out of Iraq and into Syria by the time NATO forces arrived. Thankfully, Saddam would be stopped before he got a chance to use them. 3 weeks into the invasion, statues of Saddam fell.
Oppressed and tormented for the last 23 years, hate Saddam Hussein.
From there, it was just a short time until military intelligence discovered Saddam hiding in a tunnel in a farm close to his hometown. Saddam was tried for war crimes against humanity and found guilty. But in a last act of egotistical defiance, he refused to eat his final meal or wear the hood at the gallows. He was allowed to say his final words at his execution. But before he could finish his tirade, the hangman flipped the switch and Saddam left this earth once and for all.
Hello, Satan!
Saddam.
Should they have done that, or did he deserve it? With so much to talk about with this controversial figure, we're sure you have things to say. If you liked this video, then check out our other video on Gaddafi to see where his own story is the same and different to Saddam's rise and fall. Be sure to leave a like if you want more biographies of dictators, and share this with someone interested in Iraqi history. We'll be back soon with a video, but don't forget to subscribe to How History Works.